Hi everybody, this is going to be our second video for Chapter 7. We're going to build off of the Factoring Out GCFs video here, and we're going to talk about a special type of factoring called factoring by grouping. And this type of factoring only works when we have four terms. So anytime you see a four-term polynomial and you're trying to factor, that should send up a little red flag, and you should think to yourself, hey, when we have four terms, we use factoring by grouping. So on the left side, you're going to see the steps, and on the right side, we're going to work through an example. Now, the name is called factoring by grouping, so there is this element of grouping our polynomial at the very beginning. And we do this by putting parentheses around our first two terms and another set of parentheses around our last two terms. So we have established two groups. Each parentheses represents a group here. Now, a note that you need to make to yourself is that this should always be addition in between the two groups every single time, or it's not going to work for you. Okay, it has to be addition. And we'll show the workaround of, well, what if there's a minus sign? I'll show you how to deal with that. Now, after we have established our two groups, step two is to factor the GCF out of each one of these binomials, which is each group that we have here. Okay, so in my first group, x cubed plus 7x squared, the GCF is x squared. And if I divide the terms in here by x squared, I get x plus 7. Okay, our plus sign that was in between the groups is still there. Okay, now we factor out the GCF of the second group. Okay, well, the GCF of the second group is just 2. So we go back, divide by 2, and we get x plus 7. Now, what should really be sticking out to you here is that we have two terms, technically, still here. And each one of those terms has an x plus 7. Okay, well, if we think about what a GCF is, it's the greatest thing that two terms have in common. Well, the way that we've structured our expression now, we still have two terms, but the greatest thing that these two terms have in common now is this x plus 7. So what we're going to do is we're going to factor x plus 7 out of this entire expression. And when we do that, we have to be careful. Okay, x plus 7 is my GCF, and remember, we always put parentheses, and our remainder goes in that second set of parentheses. If I go back and divide this by x plus 7, it's going to cancel with the other x plus 7. And if I divide this term by x plus 7, it's going to cancel again. So what we're left with, okay, our leftover, our remainder, is the x squared plus 2. And this is our final answer. This is the final factored form. Now, just like with factoring out GCFs and how we could check our answer by distributing, we can check our answers here by foiling these binomials back together. So let's take a look and make sure that what we get when we multiply is what we actually started with originally. Okay, so we would do x times x squared to get x cubed, x times 2 to get plus 2x, 7 times x squared to get 7x squared, and 7 times 2 to get plus 14. Now, with a little bit of rearranging, we can see that this is exactly what we started with originally, and that's how we tell that we factored correctly. So let's look at a few more examples here. Feel free to pause and rewind at any point during this video. Okay, so here's a second example. 4 terms, so we know that we should be factoring by grouping. Okay, well, we need to make our groups. First two, last two. Okay, but I have a problem. I said that this always has to be addition in between, and that's definitely a minus sign. So how do we deal with that? Okay, well, subtraction is the same as adding a negative. So what we can do is, when we have a minus sign in between, what we really need to do is we need to include that minus inside of our second grouping. So it's actually like a negative, and we can just add a plus sign in between. Because again, subtracting is the same as adding a negative, which is what we're turning this into. So now we have our two groups, we have addition in between. Now we're trying to factor the GCF out of each group. So in our first group, we can factor out a 3 and an x squared. So if we go back and divide, we get x plus 5. And in our second group, there's another note that we have to make here. Since we included that negative inside of our group, you need to remember that anytime we have a negative, we should factor out the negative with the GCF that we find. So between 2 and 10, the GCF would be 2, but since it's a negative 2, our GCF is going to be a negative 2. So anytime that the leading term in your group is negative, you need to factor a negative out with your GCF. Now when we go and divide each of these by negative 2, I'm going to get a positive x and a positive 5, which makes it match the other x plus 5 that was right here. If we had factored out a positive 2 instead, we would have ended up with a negative x minus 5, and it wouldn't have matched. Okay, and we need them to match for factoring by grouping to work. So remember, the idea is this. We have technically two terms. The GCF between these two terms now is this x plus 5. So we're going to factor out the GCF, which is x plus 5. So we put the GCF in front. We have another set of parentheses where our leftovers go, okay, the remainder. So now what we need to do is we need to go back and we need to divide each of these terms by x plus 5. When I divide by x plus 5 here, it cancels, and we're left with 3x squared. When I divide by x plus 5 here, again, it cancels, and this time we're left with a minus 2. And here it is. Okay. I want you to pause the video, and I want you to try this one on your own. Okay, so for number 3 here, we need to start by establishing our groups. Okay, again, we have this minus sign, so we're going to include it in our second group. We're going to put a plus sign here. Okay, GCF for the first group is x squared. When we go back and divide each of these by x squared, we get x plus 2. In the second group, since our first term is negative, we're going to factor out a negative with our GCF. So 5 can be factored out of 5 and 10 here. So we're going to factor out a negative 5. We go back, divide each of these by negative 5. We get x plus 2 again. So now we have a GCF of x plus 2. So we're going to factor it out. We're going to have our remainder. So when we divide each of these by x plus 2, it's going to cancel. It's going to cancel, and we're left with x squared minus 5. Okay, let's do one more. Okay, again, I want you to pause the video and try this one on your own. All right, so let's make our groups. This one, the plus sign is already in the middle, so we don't need to do anything special there. So we can jump to finding our GCFs. So for the first group, it'll be x cubed. We go back and divide. We get x plus 4. Drop our plus sign. For the second group, the GCF is 2. When we go back and divide, we get x plus 4 again. Our GCF of the entire expression is x plus 4. And when we go back and divide each term by x plus 4, we're left with x cubed plus 2. All right, so that is the end of this video. Please pause, rewatch, rewind, and ask questions if you need to. Hope you have a wonderful day.